Welcome everybody in this session. I am Dr. Nasrin Sultana Lovely, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Physiology, Moinamoti Medical College, Kumilla. Okay, we are studying about respiratory physiology, and today we will continue this topic. In previous classes, we discussed about physiological division of the respiratory passage. That is, physiologically, respiratory passage is divided into two parts: conducting zone and respiratory zone. And where is the extension of conducting zone? Extension, see here, this is the difference between these are the differences between conducting zone and respiratory zone. Okay, first, extension, conducting zone. This is very important things and important viva question. Invariably, examiner may ask you in viva exam, please tell me the extension of conducting zone and respiratory zone. Conducting zone started from where to where? See here, from trachea to the terminal bronchiole, and respiratory zone from respiratory bronchiole to the alveoli. See here, extension of conducting zone and extension of respiratory zone. Conducting zone from trachea to terminal bronchiole, and respiratory zone from respiratory bronchiole to alveoli. Now, gaseous exchange. Already I mentioned you several times that gaseous exchange doesn't occur in the conducting zone. Only conduction of air only occurs in this area, but no gaseous exchange occurs in this conducting zone. In respiratory zone, gaseous exchange always occurs. Now, number 3, thickness of the wall. Thicker. Conducting zone, here the wall thickness, wall is very much thicker, but respiratory zone wall is thinner. That's why the respiratory membrane located in this respiratory zone, that is in respiratory unit, and gaseous exchange occurs here because here wall is very much thinner. Mean diameter narrow, very wide. Total cross-sectional area less, here more. Velocity of airflow high, here low. Dead space. Already I mentioned you that in conducting zone, the air remain in the conducting zone. This air is called anatomical dead space air, and this is 150 ml. This is 150 ml. Okay. In respiratory zone, normally no dead space. In diseased lung, there may be alveolar dead space. I will discuss with you later on what is dead space, what do you mean by anatomical dead space, what do you mean by physiological dead space. I will discuss this later on. Okay, these are the differences between conducting zone and respiratory zone. Now, who can tell me anatomical division of the respiratory passage? Please, ekjon bolo. তানজিমুল কে আছো? হ্যাঁ, তুমি বলো অ্যানাটমিক্যালি রেসপিরেটরি প্যাসেজ কে আমরা কিভাবে ভাগ করি, কি কি পার্টে ভাগ করি বলো তো? অ্যানাটমিতে পড়ে এসছো, বলো। প্রিভিয়াস ক্লাসে আমি ডিসকাস করেছি অনেকবার anatomical division of respiratory passage. This is my common viva question. Physiological division and anatomical division. Physiologically to discussion করছি conducting zone and respiratory zone, but anatomically কিসে ভাগ করি আমরা respiratory passage কে?
Ma'am, principal bronchus, bronchial ma'am.
এগুলি কি লেখাপড়া করছো না বোঝা যাচ্ছে। কে পারবে অ্যানসার দিতে? Anatomical division of respiratory passage. Who can tell me?
Nose to trachea. From nose to trachea.
Nose to trachea. Which এটার নাম কি? Upper respiratory tract. We can divide anatomically respiratory passage in two parts: upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract extension হচ্ছে nose to the কতটুকু পর্যন্ত?
vocal cord পর্যন্ত।
vocal cord বলেছিলাম আমি, কেন তোমরা মনে নাই? এগুলি যদি না পারো, these are the very basic question of respiratory physiology. তোমরা যদি এগুলি না পারো কখনোই পাস করবে না। You'll be failed in your exam, okay? The upper respiratory tract extension nose to the vocal cord. That is, vocal cord are the mucous membrane of the larynx. So you can tell here, nose to the larynx, no problem at all. Now, lower respiratory tract, kotha theke kototuku extension from where to where?
Then vocal folds to
Larynx
the
থেকে alveoli
alveoli of the lung.
Alveoli of the lungs. Very good. এইভাবে যদি না বলতে পারলে কিন্তু হবে না। তানজিমুল লেখাপড়ার স্পিড বাড়াও। এভাবে পড়াশোনা করলে কিন্তু হবে না। ওকে, তাহলে these are the basic question: anatomical division of the respiratory passages and physiological division of the respiratory passages. তাহলে physiologically হচ্ছে conducting zone and respiratory zone. Okay, now functions of the lung. This is very common SCQ question, that is written question. Several times this question came under Chittagong University and Chittagong Medical University. This is very common written question. Also, this is equally important for Viva exam. What is the respiratory functions of the lung or non-respiratory function of the lung? That is, as a whole, functions of the lungs. You can divide here respiratory functions and non-respiratory functions. You have to write in your exam khata like this way. Okay, respiratory functions, only one functions, that is gaseous exchange. That is between alveoli and blood and tissue. That is, gaseous exchange means transport of oxygen from environment to the lungs and removal of carbon dioxide from lungs to the environment. That is gaseous exchange. This is the respiratory functions of the lungs. Okay, now non-respiratory functions. Please students, be careful. This is very important written and Viva question. Okay, give your concentration here, please. Non-respiratory function. First thing, surfactant production. What is surfactant? I will discuss with you. Okay, later on I will discuss this thing. So first thing, surfactant production. Number two, conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. Already in cardiovascular physiology, in blood pressure regulation, that is in renin-angiotensin mechanism, we discussed this thing, that angiotensinogen which comes from liver. This angiotensinogen is converted to angiotensin 1 in presence of renin. Then this angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. This is the real thing. This angiotensin converting enzyme, from where this enzyme come? This enzyme always comes from the lungs, but in specific area of the lungs, that is pulmonary, capillary, endothelium of the lung. This is the specific answer. But if you forget this thing, you can tell from lungs. Easy way, you can tell here, angiotensin converting enzyme comes from lung, but specifically you can tell here pulmonary, capillary, endothelium. This angiotensin converting enzyme comes from pulmonary, capillary, endothelium. Okay. And this angiotensin 2, then this angiotensin 2 causes several functions. This angiotensin 2 causes, it is powerful vasoconstrictor. It can cause ADS secretion from the posterior pituitary gland. It can cause aldosterone release from the adrenal cortex. Okay, it itself can cause salt and water retention, and it can also stimulate thirst center and desire for drinking. By this mechanism, it controls blood pressure regulation. In cardiovascular physiology, already you have studied these things, how angiotensin 2 causes blood pressure regulation. Okay, so here non-respiratory functions of one of the non-respiratory functions of lung, conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. This enzyme comes from pulmonary, capillary, endothelium of the lungs. Okay, number 3, acid-base regulation. It can cause acid-base regulation because removal of metabolic waste products, that is carbon dioxide remove kore, it can cause acid-base regulation. Number 4, temperature regulation. See here, temperature regulation. How? During expiration we can heat loss from our body. By this way temperature regulation of our body is maintained by lungs, because during aspiration evaporation, heat loss occurs, that is volatile substance, volatile gases removed from our body during expiration. By this way temperature regulation is maintained in our body by lungs. Okay, the pulmonary alveolar macrophages, already we mentioned in our previous class that several beside alveolar type 1 pneumocyte and type 2 pneumocytes, beside these cells there are a lot of specialized cells present in the alveoli, such as alveolar macrophages, that is called dust cell, alveolar macrophages, that is dust cell, neuroendocrine cell, leukocytes, plasma cells, these are also present in the alveoli. Okay, the pulmonary alveolar macrophages or dust cells, they are actively phagocytic and ingest inhaled bacteria and small particles, that is they gives body's protective mechanism, that is defensive functions of the body. They role play defensive functions of the body. Number 6, metabolic function, that is aerobic metabolism. Aerobic metabolism. Number 7, excretion of volatile substances, that is acetone, ammonia, alcohol, water vapor. During expiration, that is heat loss, already I mentioned temperature regulation, heat loss through expiration, that is water vapor. Water vapor দেখা যায় যে শীতকালে বোঝা যায়, তাই না? ডিউরিং এক্সপিরেশন শীতকালে আমরা বুঝতে পারি যে একটা ধোঁয়ার মতো বের হয়, কুয়াশার মতো, তাই না? দিস ইজ ওয়াটার ভেপার। নরমালি কিন্তু আমরা চোখে দেখি না এটা। এই যে ভোলাটাইল সাবস্টেন্সেস মানে কি, দিস আর নট, উই ক্যানট সি ইন নর্মাল আইজ, আমরা কিন্তু নরমালি কিন্তু উই ক্যানট সি দিস সাবস্টেন্সেস, দিস আর কল্ড ভোলাটাইল সাবস্টেন্স, উই ক্যানট সি usually these things, acetone, such as acetone, ammonia, alcohol, water vapor. This excretion of volatile substances occurs during expiration and we cannot see our eyes in these things. Okay, these are called volatile substances. Now, number 8, fibrinolytic activity. Fibrinolytic activity, that is lysis of fibrinogen. Fibrinolytic, that is lungs has fibrinolytic activity. Number 9, filtration. The pulmonary capillary bed may act as a filter, preventing particles from reaching the systemic circulation. So, pulmonary capillary bed acts as filter. So, number 1 of the function is filtration. Number 10, prostaglandin synthesis and removal. Prostaglandin synthesis and removal. This is also one of the functions of the lungs. So, for written exam, you have to write what are the functions of the lungs. If the question come like this, describe functions of the lungs, you have to write down like this way: respiratory functions and non-respiratory function. Respiratory functions, of course, obviously it should be gaseous exchanges, and non-respiratory function, surfactant production, conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. This enzyme comes from specifically pulmonary capillary endothelium of the lungs. Number 3, acid base regulation. Number 4, temperature regulation. Number 5, alveolar macrophages are actively phagocytic and ingest inhaled bacteria and small particles, that is defensive function. Number 6, metabolic function. Number 7, excretion of volatile substances such as acetone, ammonia, alcohol and water vapor. Number 8, fibrinolytic activity. Number 9, filtration. Number 10, prostaglandin synthesis and removal. Also, you can write down here the lungs can act as reservoir for left ventricle. Left ventricle, because all blood from right ventricle, all blood goes towards the lungs, both lungs, for oxygenation purpose. You know that very well. It is known to you that circulation of the heart, that is all blood comes from through the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, comes into the right atrium of the heart. Then all blood comes through the atrioventricular valve, it comes into the where through the tricuspid valve, it comes into the right ventricle. From right ventricle through the pulmonary trunk, it goes towards the lungs for oxygenation purpose. So, one of the functions of the lungs, it acts as reservoir. It acts as reservoir for left ventricle. Left ventricle, because ultimately after oxygenation, all blood comes into the left atrium, then finally comes into the left ventricle. So, lungs acts as reservoir for left ventricle. You can write this this function also. Lungs acts as reservoir for left ventricle. You can write this function also. Okay, do you understand these things, students? A written question ta ki bujhte perecho? This is very important written question. Several times this question came in your written exam in under Chittagong University and also in Chittagong Medical University. Write down the functions of lungs. You have to write two part, respiratory functions and non-respiratory function. তোমরা কি বুঝতে পেরেছো এটুকু?
জি ম্যাম।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে। Now, very important things, this is basic question. What are the types of respiration or processes of respiration? Please, you have to remember two things here, two things. What are the processes? Examiner may ask you what are the processes of respiration, or might ask you what are the types of respiration. Two things, that is processes of types, same thing. What are the processes of respiration or what are the types of respiration? Same question. So you have to remember these two things here. Okay, what are the types or processes of respiration? There are two types of respiration or two processes of respiration: external respiration and internal respiration. External means outside, external means outside, internal means inside your body. That is external respiration, that is up to the lung, that is the absorption of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide from the body as a whole. That is, it occurs at the lung level. It occurs at the lung level. This is called external respiration. That is absorption of oxygen, that is transport of oxygen from outside into the lung and removal of carbon dioxide from lungs to the external environment. This is actually called external respiration. External respiration occurs at the lung level. That's why it is called external respiration. But what about internal respiration? That is, it involves utilization of oxygen and production of carbon dioxide at the tissue level. That is, when oxygen transported inside the tissue level. Internal, that is whenever oxygen goes inside the tissue level in internal side of the body, and production of carbon dioxide at the tissue level, and the gases exchanges between the cell and the fluid medium. This is called internal respiration. That is, it occurs within the internal side of the body. But external respiration occurs at the lung level. Please remember this point here. So internal respiration means that is utilization, that is whenever oxygen transported inside the tissue level, the tissue utilizes oxygen and ultimately production of metabolic waste product, carbon dioxide and gases exchange occur between the cell and the fluid medium. This is called internal respiration. So this is the common viva question. What are the processes or types of respiration? You have to remember this question here. Okay, now number 2, what are the phases or events? Same thing. Examiner might ask you what are the phases. Tell me what are the phases of respiration, or examiner might ask you here what are the events of respiration. Same thing, same thing. Phases or events of respiration. One thing, first point, inspiration, and number 2, expiration. Always remember here, inspiration is active process. This is very important MCQ question. Inspiration is active process. This is very, very important MCQ question. And expiration always passive process. Please students remember here, inspiration is active process, expiration is passive process. You have to remember this point here. Inspiration is active process because inspiration means intake of air into the lung. It is nothing but intake of air into the lungs. And duration, very important for MCQ question and also for Viva exam. Its duration is about 2 seconds. But see here, expiration, it means output of air from the lungs, and duration is 3 seconds. This is very, very important Viva question and also equally important for MCQ exam. Inspiration, less time, that is 2 seconds only is required. But expiration, it required 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Expiration 3 seconds. Inspiration 2 seconds. Inspiration is active process. Expiration is passive process. You have to remember this very nicely. Okay, you have to memorize this point. Okay, now muscles of respiration. This is very common Viva and written question. What are the muscles of respiration? What are the muscles of respiration? First, Muscles, I am discussing muscles of inspiration. Whenever the question come like this, discuss the muscles of respiration, you have to write down muscles of inspiration and muscles of expiration, because both inspiration plus expiration means respiration. Inspiration plus expiration means respiration. Whenever the question come like this, discuss the muscles of respiration, you have to write two things here: muscles of inspiration and muscles of expiration. Now we are discussing about the muscles of inspiration. In quiet inspiration, that is at resting stage. In quiet inspiration means in resting inspiration, only two muscles is required for quiet inspiration. At resting stage, that is the diaphragm. It is the major muscles of inspiration. It accounts 75%. So its role is 75%. So it is the major muscle of respiration, the diaphragm. You have to tell here the diaphragm. এখানে সুন্দর করে বলতে হবে the diaphragm, because its role is 75% in inspiration. Okay, and in quiet inspiration means in resting condition. And external intercostal muscle, these two things are involved in quiet inspiration, that is at resting inspiration. Okay, if in forceful inspiration, if you take forceful inspiration, forcefully যদি আমরা শ্বাস নেই তাহলে আর কি কি মাসল লাগবে? First you have to tell in forceful inspiration, first muscle of course the diaphragm. Diaphragm ছাড়া কখনোই inspiration হবে না। তাহলে question যদি if examiner ask you like this, please tell me the muscles involved in forceful inspiration, you have to start from the diaphragm. First the diaphragm, then external intercostal muscle, then third one sternocleidomastoid muscle, 4 anterior serratus muscle or serratus anterior muscle, number 5 scalene, number 6 ala nesi. Okay, these are the muscles of inspiration. In quiet inspiration, again I am repeating, first muscle is the diaphragm. It because it accounts 75%, its role 75% in quiet inspiration and also in forceful inspiration. And external intercostal muscle, these two muscles are involved in quiet inspiration, that is a resting stage. But in forceful inspiration, the diaphragm, external intercostal muscle, and additional muscles are sternocleidomastoid muscle, anterior serratus or serratus anterior muscle, scalene, and ala nesi. Now, what is the role of the diaphragm? Diaphragm pulls lower surfaces of the lungs downwards. Diaphragm causes what is the role of diaphragm here? Already I mentioned you that 75%. It accounts 75%, and it pulls lower surfaces of the lungs downwards. Karon during inspiration, diaphragm causes contraction. Diaphragm causes contraction and lung becomes expanded during inspiration. আমরা যখন শ্বাস নেই, লাংসটা কি হবে? expanded হবে, rib cage গুলি elevated হয় এবং diaphragmটা কি হয়? contraction of the diaphragm হয়। ঠিক আছে, তাহলে diaphragm, what is the role of diaphragm here? It pulls the lower surfaces of the lungs downwards. It pulls the lower surfaces of the lungs downwards. Now, what is the role of external intercostal muscle? It is the main muscles to elevate the rib cage. Please remember here, what is the role of external intercostal muscle? It is the main muscles which elevate the rib cage. Please write down everybody. Role of diaphragm, it pulls the lower surfaces of the lungs downwards. What is the role of external intercostal muscle? Write down everybody. It is the main muscle which elevate the rib cage. Now, what is the role of sternocleidomastoid muscle? What is the role of sternocleidomastoid muscle? It lifts the sternum upward. Please write down. What is the role of sternocleidomastoid muscle? It lifts the sternum upward. Now, what is the role of anterior serratus muscle or serratus anterior muscle? It lifts many ribs. It lifts many ribs upward. It lifts many ribs upward. What is the role of scalene muscle? Scalene muscle, it lifts the first two rib. প্রথম দুইটা ribs কে সে upwardly elevate করে। ঠিক আছে, তাহলে it lifts the first two ribs. What is the role of scalene? It lifts the first two ribs. Now, what is the role of elanese? Elanese. It causes flaring of the nostril. Flaring of the nostril. আমাদের যে নোজ আছে, নোজের যে দুটো ছিদ্র আছে এগুলিকে কি বলি আমরা? nostril বলি। তাহলে ফ্লেয়ারিং মানে কি? এটা ফুলাবে। তাহলে ডিউরিং ইন্সপিরেশন যখন আমরা শ্বাস নেই তাহলে কি হবে? এটা কি হবে? ফ্লেয়ারিং হবে। ইট ফ্লেয়ারিং দা টু nostrils, ঠিক আছে? ইট কজেস ফ্লেয়ারিং অফ দি nostrils। আমাদের যে নাকে দুটো ছিদ্র আছে এই nostril গুলিকে কি হবে? ইনফ্লেশন করবে, ফুলাতে সাহায্য করবে। তাহলে elanese muscle causing flaring of the nostril. These are the functions. These are the functions of all muscles involved in quiet inspiration and forceful inspiration. Now, see the action of the external intercostal muscle. It is the main muscles to elevate the rib cage. তারা rib cage গুলিকে কি হয়? নরমাল পজিশন থেকে আপওয়ার্ড এলিভেট করে, ঠিক আছে? এই যে দেখো, ডিউরিং ইন্সপিরেশন রিবটাকে কি করবে? এলিভেট করলো। দিস ইজ দ্য নরমাল পজিশন। নরমাল পজিশন। তাহলে রিব কেজ গুলিকে লিফট আপ করে, দ্যাট ইজ আপওয়ার্ডলি যে উঠাচ্ছে, এলিভেট করে, সেটা হচ্ছে অ্যাকশন অফ দ্য, ইট ইজ দ্য মেজর মাসলস টু রিব কেজ, এলিভেট দ্য রিব কেজ আপওয়ার্ড, ঠিক আছে? নরমাল পজিশন, এটা হচ্ছে আপওয়ার্ড এলিভেশন হচ্ছে। ওকে, now muscles of expiration. Muscles of expiration, normally I have told that expiration is a passive process, মানে কি কোনো কাজই করতে হয় না। during expiration এ কোনো muscle involvement নাই, no muscle is involved during expiration, so it is a passive process. expiration এ কোনো কাজ হয় না, ঠিক আছে? expiration normally হয়ে যাচ্ছে, এখানে কোনো কাজ নাই, যার ফলে এটাকে কি বলা হয়? passive process, no muscle involved here. But in forceful expiration, যদি forcefully তুমি নিঃশ্বাস ফেলতে চাও, in forceful expiration, তাহলে কি কি মাসল লাগবে? rectus abdominis muscle, internal intercostal muscle, internal and external oblique, and transversus abdominis. 4 muscles is required for forceful expiration, but first two is very important for viva exam. rectus abdominis and internal intercostal muscle. You have to remember these two muscles very carefully here for forceful expiration, but normally at resting stage, that is in quiet expiration, no muscles involved here, so it is a passive process because no muscles is involved here and no working is required here. But in forceful expiration, two muscles is very essential, rectus abdominis muscle and internal intercostal muscles. Also there are additional two muscles you can tell here, internal and external obliques muscle and transversus abdominis muscle. Okay, now just see here action of the internal intercostal muscle. Internal intercostal muscle, mainly it causes pulling the lower limbs downwards. It causes pulling the, what is the action of the internal intercostal muscle? It pulling the lower limbs downwards. তাহলে স্টার্নামটা কি হবে? সরি, rib cage গুলি কি হবে? depressed হবে। during inspiration rib cage become elevated, but during expiration, forceful expiration এ normal expiration কি হয়? rib cage টা কি হয়? depressed হয়ে যায়, তাই না? তাহলে internal intercostal muscle টা কি হয়? rib cage গুলিকে কি করবে? it pulling the lower ribs downwards, নিচের দিকে নিয়ে যাবে, ঠিক আছে? Okay, see the summary of the muscles of inspiration and expiration. I have taken this slide from South Asian Guidance, second edition South Asian Guidance থেকে আমি চার্টটা নিয়েছি। দেখো, already we discussed everything. Inspiratory muscle, main muscles, the diaphragm, external intercostal muscles, and accessory inspiratory muscles during forceful inspiration. First muscle is, of course, you have to tell here the diaphragm. Second, external intercostal muscle. Third one, sternocleidomastoid muscle. Fourth one, anterior serrative muscle. Fifth, scalene muscle, and sixth, elanese muscles for forceful inspiration. Now, expiratory muscles, that is hyperventilation. First muscle, rectus abdominis, and number 2, internal intercostal muscles. And you can tell here also internal and external oblique muscle and transversus abdominis. These are the summary of muscles involved in normal quiet inspiration, forceful inspiration, and forceful expiration. Forceful expiration. নেক্সট ক্লাসে কিন্তু আমি সবার পড়া ধরবো এই যে মাসলস অফ রেসপিরেশন, হোয়াট ইজ রেসপিরেশন, হোয়াট আর দ্য টাইপস of respiration or processes of respiration, what are the events or phases of respiration, what are the muscles of respiration, that is during quiet inspiration, during forceful inspiration, during quiet expiration, and during forceful expiration, which muscles are involved. ঠিক আছে, সবাইকে কিন্তু নেক্সট ক্লাসে আমি পড়া ধরবো। বুঝতে কি পেরেছো? হ্যালো স্টুডেন্টস, তোমরা বুঝতে পেরেছো কিনা? বুঝতে পেরেছো? নেক্সট ক্লাসে কিন্তু পড়া ধরবো, যে কোশ্চেনগুলি আমি বলেছি সবগুলি ভালো করে স্টাডি করতে হবে, ঠিক আছে? আচ্ছা, নেক্সট ক্লাস উইল ডিসকাস দা বেসিক মেকানিজম অফ রেসপিরেশন। এটা আমরা নেক্সট ক্লাসে পড়বো। আজকে এইটুকুই, আমি অল্প অল্প করে পড়াচ্ছি যেন বুঝতে পারো, অল্প অল্প করে পড়াচ্ছি যেন বোঝা যায়। ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিবডি, থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ। হ্যাঁ বলো
ম্যাম। মুঝে ফোর্সফুল ইন্সপিরেশনের অ্যাকশনগুলো মাসেলের মেমোটা লিখতে পারিনি নেটের জন্য।
আচ্ছা, আমি আবারও যাচ্ছি, ঠিক আছে, আমি আবারও যাচ্ছি। ফোর্সফুল, এটাই তো না এই স্লাইডটা, এই যে কোয়াইট ইন্সপিরেশন আর ফোর্সফুল ইন্সপিরেশন। তাহলে ফোর্সফুল ইন্সপিরেশনে ফার্স্ট ইউ হ্যাভ টু টেল দি ডায়াফ্রাম। আগে মনে রাখতে হবে কোয়াইট ইন্সপিরেশনে শুধু দুইটা বলবা, দি ডায়াফ্রাম আর এক্সটার্নাল ইন্টারকোস্টাল মাসল, ব্যাস দুইটা পয়েন্ট। কিন্তু যদি বলে ফোর্সফুল ইন্সপিরেশন, তাহলে ফার্স্ট শুরু করবে দি ডায়াফ্রাম, সেকেন্ড এক্সটার্নাল ইন্টারকোস্টাল মাসল, থার্ড ওয়ান স্টার্নোক্লিডোমাস্টাইড মাসল, ফোর্থ অ্যান্টেরিয়র সেরাটি মাসল, ফিফথ হচ্ছে স্ক্যালেনি মাসল, নাম্বার 6 এলানিজি মাসল। ঠিক আছে, প্রত্যেকটা ফাংশন আমি বলে গেছি, এই ফাংশনগুলি সহ কিন্তু জিজ্ঞেস করব।
মানে ফাংশনটা লিখতে পারেন।
ফাংশনটা, ফার্স্ট ফাংশন হচ্ছে ডায়াফ্রাম কি কাজ করে? ইট পুলস লোয়ার সারফেসেস অফ দ্য লাংস ডাউনওয়ার্ডস। প্লিজ রাইট ডাউন হিয়ার, ইট পুলস লোয়ার সারফেসেস অফ দি লাংস ডাউনওয়ার্ডস। এটা হচ্ছে ডায়াফ্রামের কাজ। নাও ফাংশন অফ external intercostal muscle, it is the main muscles to elevate the rib cage. External intercostal muscle, it is the main muscles to elevate the rib cage, উপরের দিকে elevate করবে rib cage কে, to elevate the rib cage. Now sternocleidomastoid muscle, sternocleidomastoid muscle, it lift the sternum upward, it lift the sternum upward. লিখেছো?
জি ম্যাম।
Now serratus anterior and anterior serrati muscle, it lift many ribs, অনেকগুলি ribs কেটে উপরের দিকে তুলে ফেলবে, it lift many ribs. Now function of scalene muscle, it lift the first two ribs, it lift the first two ribs. Now Elanesi muscle, it causes flaring of the nostrils. Elanesi muscle, it causes flaring of the nostrils.
জি ম্যাম লিখছি।
Rectus abdominis muscle, during forceful expiration rectus abdominis কি বলেছিলাম? pulling the lower ribs downward. ঠিক আছে, ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিবডি।